stream. All right. We got both
right.
live.
All right. We're live now?
Yeah.
All right.
We're good to go.
Welcome back to the podcast, episode 5, High Frequencies Podcast. I'm Jordan from Brooklyn.
And I'm Jamal from Los Angeles. And today we've got a very special episode for you, and it's about how to start a session.
This podcast is sponsored by Psychosis Music, which is the project of my co-host Jamal Taylor. Psychosis is an artist off Bass Tap Records with a remix album coming soon. Jamal Taylor also specializes in mixing, mastering, and production for multiple genres, including pop, hip-hop, R&B, and electronic music. For inquiries, please email drpsychosis@gmail.com. That's drcykOSIS@gmail.com. For more information, visit psychosis.net.
All right. Thank you very much, Jordan. I appreciate that. Today in audio news, well, not just today, but the last couple of weeks in audio news, probably the biggest piece of news is that Daft Punk broke up. Believe after more than 2 decades of being together, this French house duo has affected music on a large scale, not just electronic music, but music in general. They've had collaborations with Pharrell, with Niles Rodgers, with The Weeknd. They've pretty much been a huge influence on every electronic artist, including myself. Daft Punk was one of the first electronic bands that really got me listening to electronic music when I was a single digits child. So I know that's a huge loss to the music industry, but their partnership lasted longer than most marriages. So there's that. Ableton 11 also came out the last week of February, and it has improved CPU metering, the new nature-inspired instruments, which are very heavily based on AI and using machine learning to try and replicate the probability that happens with trees growing, rain droplets dropping, things like that. Kind of introduces randomization in Ableton with stock instruments, which is really, really interesting. And so it's pretty low on CPU usage. They also redesigned a bunch of different devices, including adding a new reverb device, including redesigning the chorus, flanger, phaser devices. And the new hybrid reverb includes not just an algorithmic reverb, but also a convolution reverb. And you can kind of mix between the two. So that's really interesting. They also introduced linked track editing, which I've made use of, which is pretty interesting. They changed the follow actions for clips, or the way that you can do follow actions. Now you can trigger a whole scene to have follow actions, as opposed to before it was just individual clips. Also introduced something new that I haven't seen before with any DAW, is they will actually follow the BPM of a live input. So now you can be playing with your band and Ableton will synchronize with the drummer as opposed to the drummer having to synchronize with Ableton. So that's some pretty interesting new technology that I haven't seen yet. I haven't got to play with it yet, but eventually I will when I start practicing with bands again, now that everything's starting to open up. And the biggest thing to me by far that Ableton has finally added is comping, vocal comping. Being able to take multiple takes of a vocal and have them all nested within the same track, and then really, really fast and intuitive vocal editing. So that's probably the biggest addition to Ableton 11 that I'm really enjoying and I've used a lot lately. The last thing is the Grammys just happened. Literally, 2 days ago, this past Sunday. And my favorite Grammy winner is Kaytranada. He's the first Black artist to win the Best Dance and Electronic Album. So congratulations to Kaytranada. It's well-deserved. He's one of my favorite electronic artists out right now. And his album was phenomenal, so it's well-deserved. It's one of the few times where I agree with the Grammy choices. And that's it for audio news.
Well, thanks, Jamal.
Yeah.
Those are some exciting innovations in audio.
Yeah.
And today's episode is also equally exciting. We're going to be discussing how to start a session from the ground up. We're going to be talking about everything from preparation shortcuts and tips, how to run every possible session in any situation on the planet, and finally, how to shut it down, close it up the right way so you don't lose anything.
Yes.
So with that said, let's jump right into it. Starting off with setting up a session. I start, and Jamal as well, we've spoken about this.
Yeah.
We start even the night before the session is set to begin.
Yes.
Because there is some stuff you can do before the session starts. And these are just some things that can help your life be a little bit smoother the next day. And we'll get into kind of why that's important during this podcast as well. So with me, something I like to do the night before is very simple. I like to clean. Just clean a little bit. Not like scrub, but just clean, just organize. I also like to get some sleep. Now, you can totally do a session without sleep or on minimal sleep. But getting sleep is very important when it comes to thinking correctly and also being able to stay awake for a long period of time without caffeine. Yeah. And then finally, I like to brainstorm. Brainstorming is a way that I'm not going to be laying in bed at night saying, oh God, what am I going to do tomorrow? It's something where I have everything set on paper. I write it on paper so I don't lose it. On an electronic device. Those are some things, though, that I feel I always want to kind of, in some way, be mindful of before I start a session. What about you, Jamal? What do you do the night before? What are some techniques and tricks you do?
So one thing I definitely do, as you said, we spoke about this, I clean too. That's one thing I think, especially if you have like a home studio type setup, like both you and I do, and probably everyone listening, someone has some sort of home setup. One thing that I always try to do is make sure that if I have a session the next day, I want everything to be placed in a accessible place. So whatever I was doing the day before, I want to clean up any cabling, any sort of like things that are laying around. Like if I have coffee cups sitting around, it's not like a deep cleaning. It's not like I'm like cleaning off my table and like dusting and all that. Usually I'll just kind of like throw away all the trash, fold up some cable or wrap up some cables, put away instruments I'm not going to be using. Just really basic things like that. And then in terms of sleeping, I try to get a minimum 6 hours of sleep. That's just, knowing myself, that's just what I need in order to operate at optimum efficiency throughout the day. I need minimum 6 hours of sleep. Maximum 8 hours of sleep, that's ideal. Usually don't get that much, but ideally I try to get 8 hours. And it's mostly about the fact that when you are extremely tired, your hearing perception ends up being very different. So when your body is tired, when your mind is tired, you're not going to hear things as accurately as you would if you were in good spirits and a good mood. And also being in a good mood the next day and being ready for the session and ready to approach the day is always good. And that's usually
a great point.
It starts the night before. So yeah,
that's a great point. You don't want to wake up with or not sleep and have ear fatigue going into the session, or just fatigue in general.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. So it's kind of like a reset, I feel like. And sleep, 6 hours, that's a good number. I'd say for me, my absolute minimum would be about 5. But I've heard you should sleep maybe 8 or something.
Yeah,
I think
it's recommended to get 8.
Any more than 8, it feels like if you're able to, it feels kind of like the opposite effect. You wake up more tired. Yep. So I would not suggest sleeping a lot.
Yeah,
but a good 6 hours, that's nice if you have it. If you don't, tough it out. If you do, then great.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing too that I wanted to say, and I don't know, Jordan, if you do this too, but I like to, it's similar to how you write down your notes to brainstorm. What I like to do, this is something I do either the night before or the morning of. I like to set my intentions for the session. So for example, it could be a recording session. That means my intention for the recording session is to leave with the verse recorded or the hook recorded or everything, the whole song recorded. If it's a sound design session, then usually I'm doing it for a purpose. If it's like, maybe it's for a sample pack, or maybe it's for a song that I'm working on and I need more sounds for it. Or it could just be that I just want to make some cool sounds. I usually like to sit there beforehand. Sometimes I don't write it down. A lot of the times I do. I have a bunch of notes on my computer and I tend to refer back to them. That way I don't get lost like while I'm doing the session. That way I'm not like trying to keep track of everything in my head. So I usually sit down, set my intentions, and it could even be just like before I fall asleep, I write some notes down, or right when I wake up, I write my notes down. It's not like a huge thing. It's just setting the intention or setting goals so that I know what I want to achieve for that specific session. So or do you do something along those lines?
Yeah, I sort of consider that brainstorming, but
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, that is these very similar thing
Yeah,
that I additionally do. I don't necessarily just write out my intention, but I do write out small goals or some
Yeah.
things that I want to achieve, ideas, maybe say like, make sure you turn this on, make sure you have this ready for the client, make sure this file is loaded, download this from Google Drive.
Yeah.
But that's a really, really great point, is to add intent. Because then it kind of gives way to distraction. You're not going to
exactly.
You're not going to
be messing around.
Yeah, so it's just a way of getting focused. Now, with that said, the day of, this is a really important moment when it comes to being prepared. So I kind of want to talk about this, and I'll throw it to you afterwards. But what I like to do, one of the biggest first things I like to do the day of that I get up, is I get this out of the way. I check my emails, right? And then I disable my Wi-Fi. So I want to make sure my Wi-Fi is off, because somebody like me, I'll be easily distracted, and I'll be like, oh, I wonder if I got a new email. So I'll start going on Google, and then I'll be like, oh, this is a link to a website in my email. And then I'm on the websites, and I'm already distracted. Or you get a coupon in your email, and now you have to click on it, right? But you're supposed to be working. So I just disable Wi-Fi. Now, another thing I like to do is I get like my drinks ready to go. So by drinks, I mean like a water, maybe a caffeinated beverage of some kind, and that's pretty much it. And then in terms of, I'll put a little bit of food that I don't have to get up, like snacks. Small snacks, and you have, nothing like a huge meal. And then I use the bathroom. Obviously, want to get that out of the way. It's kind of like similar to playing shows. This is like sort of the same ritual I have before I play a show. I'm like, you got to use the bathroom. If you don't have to use the bathroom,
that's
force
very
yourself.
important.
Yeah. Because you don't want to be like, I'm ready to go.
Mid-set and have to use the bathroom.
So, and then the final last thing I do is I turn on any piece of gear that I'm going to need for that session. So if it's like an amp, let's say like a guitar tube amp. So I'm going to turn on the tube amp, let the tube warm up, make sure it's all plugged in, preferably before you turn it on. And then that's it. Then I'm good. Then I don't have to be like, I'm going to record this guitar part. And then you're like, I got to wait for the tube to warm up. Or you're like, oh, it's not plugged in. Where's my cable? Oh, I don't have this cable. Now you're back on Amazon or something. So it's like you want to make sure that everything is ready. What are your experiences the day of? What are some of your rituals you do to make sure your session is rock solid?
Yeah, so that's one of the main things I do too, is making sure equipment is on. I also... I guess in this scenario, it would be me going to a studio, because lately my current home setup is not like a full studio, but lately I've been going to a lot of either friends' studios or just renting out a studio. So I usually actually show up early, maybe 30 minutes early. That way I'm not infringing on my actual like paid studio time if I'm allowed to show up early, if the room is open. I show up early. I have a hydro flask that I just fill with water, and I bring that with me everywhere. So I always have at least a liter of water with me. Even if I like stop at the store or 7-Eleven or something like that before, and just grab water, maybe a Red Bull. And if it's morning time, always a coffee. Coffee is basically like my water. And then I go around, I make sure depending on what the session is, I make sure all of that equipment is either laid out and ready to be plugged in, or it is plugged in and turned on. So like if I need microphones, or if I want to test different microphones on their voice or something like that, I'll pull them all out, I'll lay them all out, and then get them ready to just be plugged in. And so I'll lay out all the cabling I need. I'll turn on the interface. Like I'll make sure everything's on. I'll turn the computer on. And I'll just let it be for 20, 30 minutes, however long, until my client arrives. So, yeah.
That's great.
So what are some of your techniques in terms of actually moving from just the session itself and then now moving into the DAW?
So something I like to do is a general session, just something I do every single time. And I think it's very, very important because it's very overlooked by myself and everybody, is you always just want to double check your sample rate. This is something like I'm talking in two places. One, I want to look at the files of the client because I want to, or whoever, if you're working on your project, then you look at your own files and make sure they're the right sample rate that they were rendered.
Yeah.
But additionally, if the client, if they didn't send you a weird sample rate file or something that is just off,
Very
and
important.
then the second with your DAW, you want to make sure that your DAW is in the correct sample rate, so you're not going to be, let's say you want to record and then it's recording at 48, but you needed it at 44, or vice versa. That could be detrimental, and then you might have to say, well, now I have to convert it, meaning it wouldn't be as great as it could have been.
Yeah.
Maybe. Now, the second thing is you want to make sure your bit depth equally is the correct bit depth to be recording at.
Yeah.
This is in the recording section of the preferences menu of most DAWs. And then additionally, you want to check the files bit depth that the client sends you or that you have, because there's been tons of times that they send a 16-bit file and
Or an MP3.
or an MP3, and you
Yeah.
also want to check the file types. Of course, that's another thing.
Yeah.
And then finally, the other thing I'll do is I'll make sure that the DAW isn't warping my samples, my stems that I import, because all DAWs, I'm not sure all, but most DAWs have a defaulted setting to time stretch whatever you put in. So you're going to be making these remixes of your client's material, and they're going to say, "What is this? I didn't want this at 120 BPM."
Yeah, why is it so fast?
So always just, you can set it so it stays off, but I make sure sample rate is right, bit depth is right for session and files, and then I make sure that the files aren't time stretched to warp the client's original song and idea. What are some things you do, Jamal?
I actually am a huge proponent of production templates. So for me, I try to do a lot of like sync licensing and basically trying to place tracks either like in TV commercials or things like that, or trying to place tracks with artists. And usually they ask for songs within like 3-4 days or a week or something like that. So I tend to try to work very quickly. So right when I open my session up, I usually, like, after double checking like the bit depth, the sample rate, all those things, I usually have a template set up. So my default template, because I mostly use Ableton, my default template, it has all the drums I typically use already loaded into a drum rack, already ready to go, already ready to make a drum loop, just like right off the bat. Then I also have my synths that I usually use, so things like Serum, Operator, some other synths that I use, like I think one of them's Imposcar.
Great.
And I have everything already routed for a good mix. So I can pretty quickly, I've done this before where I sit there with a client and I've made a beat in front of them and pretty quickly get a good enough mix because my routing is already set up. And that includes like with vocal recording as well. Like if they need auto-tune, it's already loaded into the session. If they need reverb and delay, it's already loaded into the session. And the speed, the quickness of the speed, it allows you to be more creative because then you're not thinking like, oh, where is this delay that I really like? It's already loaded in the session. Because now, instead of taking your brain from creative mode into looking for VST mode, then you kind of break that concentration. So I use my templates. I have a bunch of different templates depending on what I need it for in the session. And so I'll just open up that template and then I'll be able to just dive right in and not have to think about where things are, and I can just start getting creative.
That's really awesome, and that's super alien to me. I'm completely opposite to that.
Oh yeah,
I don't use any templates because somebody like me, I would forget like my password on online. I forget the password if it's saved there. I would forget what I did if I lost that particular file. Then I would have anxiety worrying about losing my session files and not knowing what I had in there to a T. So it's a matter of, and then the second reason I don't do that is because I feel like I start overusing the things that I have already loaded in there, and I'm like never going to be creative and think of, I feel like using this today. Like I'll always make a sub using Operator, or always make a bass using Massive, or so like some days I might want to make a sub using some weird thing that I haven't made a sub in, or something like that. So personally for me, on a creative level, I don't do that, but on a client level, that sounds amazing. That's everyone listening, you guys should probably, for clients, why wouldn't you want a template to be super fast so you can just knock it out of the park? And I see both perspectives. You don't have to. You know,
both perspectives are useful. Because honestly, when I'm making my own music, I start with a blank slate. I start with nothing. I start with new drums, new synths. Like I start with an audio track and a MIDI track.
Same.
That's how I start.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
That's
when
really
I'm
awesome.
making stuff for people though, I tend to work from templates because then I can get things done quickly and I can get the idea out of my head instead of searching. Because people, especially if your artist is standing over your shoulder and you're just sitting there listening to kicks, they'll be like, can we just pick that one? Like, let's get started.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
well, what about signal processing? You had mentioned signal processing chains and what you do to your tracks, like with default tracks. Somebody like me, I start off with fresh track and I think of what I want to add, but you have a totally different perspective and theory. Let's hear it.
Yeah. So I usually like starting with default. In Ableton, you can save a track as a default track. And the same thing in Logic, same thing in Pro Tools. You can, every time you create an audio track, you can have certain things loaded on. And what I do is I have a EQ, a glue compressor, and a utility loaded on every default track, but they're all turned off. So the key here is having all of the devices on the track turned off so that if you have something on that track, it's not affecting the sound of the track immediately. That way you get to hear what the sound sounds like. And then most of the time, because I usually will need some type of EQ or some type of compression, or I use the utility to turn the volume up or down, or if there's a phase issue, flip the phase or make it mono or whatever. I just have those devices already loaded on, so I don't have to go looking for them. But they start off bypassed. They start off in the first place. And that's a key element because then you're not affecting your sound. And then it allows me to say, for example, I want to use a different EQ. That EQ isn't affecting what I'm hearing, and I'm thinking like, oh, I want to hear like a Puig Tech EQ or a Pultec EQ on there, and so I'll switch it out or something like that. But in general, that's what I use for default tracks.
That's awesome. It's kind of like a console feel, you know, everything's already laid out for you.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Exactly.
That's cool. Again, I see both sides. Whatever you guys choose to do, that's the right way to do it, you know?
That's kind of where it's funny you say that because that's kind of where I got the idea from is consoles.
Yeah.
Because a console, like a track has a compressor built into it, has an EQ built into it, has the trim built into it. So that's why I kind of do it like that, is that every track I open, it already has everything I need to use on it. But it's in bypass, so it's not affecting what I'm hearing.
I totally. I do not mean to sound like I am super creative and everything I do is completely different. I guarantee you, I probably just do a template by scratch every time. I probably just do the same thing every time, you know? And I'm like, oh, it's always different for sure. It's probably just a template that I'm having to longhand do every time.
Like there's also in a new feature in Ableton 11, they allow you to save your current set as a template, but they have like a templates folder now.
That's
awesome. So you can just save like a whole bunch of templates in that one folder. And Ableton, before that, they allowed you to save the current set as default.
Just one, I think, though, right?
Yeah, it was just one. And now you can have like a whole list of templates.
That's really cool.
Work from. Yeah.
That's really cool. All right. Well, let's go to an ad read.
Yeah. All right. So this podcast is also sponsored by JMBK Audio. Head over to jmbkaudio.wordpress.com for all your mixing and mastering services. On another note, you can check out my co-host Jordan's music under the name Zybrium at soundcloud.com XYBRIUM. That's soundcloud.com/XYBRIUM.
All right. Thanks for that, Jamal. So let's get right into it. How to run a session. What we're going to talk about now, guys, we're going to talk about how to run a sound design session, a production session, a mixing session, a mastering session, and client sessions. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So with sound design sessions, these are actually times where I sit down and Jamal, you've also said you do this. You just sit down and you literally make sounds. That is the goal. That is the objective. The reason I do this, or one would do this, is so you can make presets for yourself in the future. And so when you're making a song, you're just using presets that you've made at a distant other time. So here are some things that I always try and make sure are happening anytime this session is going on. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set goals. And we talked about this in the beginning when you said you do this. You set the goal of what you're going to do and you map it and lay it out. Well, that's something I do here is you want to say, I'm going to make 5 basses or I'm going to make 10 pads or something. You don't say, I'm going to make sounds because what does that mean? You're going to be there all day making crazy sounds.
There's no direction to what's happening.
Exactly. And another thing I like to do is I choose my weapon of choice. I choose my synth. So I'll say like, I'm going to use Massive. Now, maybe you can not do that. Maybe you can say like, I'll choose whatever synth I want. I like to like designate the synth I'm going to use. I'm going to make presets in Massive today or whatever. Now, another important thing is don't force anything. So if you can't make 5 bass sounds, don't make 5 bass sounds because your future self will look back and hate you if you make 5 really bad bass sounds just to make them. You'll be like, what is this? Why did I make this? When did I think this was a good idea? And then here's 2 huge things. Save in stages as you work. So what I do is I will make a sound and you just, as you're working, that sounds dope. Save it and then keep evolving the sound. Oh, that sounds even cooler. Save it as another version of that sound. So you can have 10 different versions of the same sound. I call that saving in stages. And then lastly, the final thing in sound design sessions to keep yourself always going strong is organization. Organize your files. Keep everything organized. I have a folder for basses. I have a folder for leads. I have a folder for pads inside of a folder for just Massive presets and a folder for just Serum or just FM8. So you can make these and your future self will say thank you for organizing this into an easy to find way. You don't want to make all these sounds and then you can't find them a month later or a year or 5 years later. I even have presets from like 5 or 10 years ago that they might not be the best, but you can take those ideas and you can still contort and manipulate them into something new. What about you, Jamal? Let's hear your sound design session starter techniques.
So one thing when I first sit down for a sound design session, the very first thing that I do is this is something I may not write out, but in my head, I say I'm sitting down to make sounds for XYZ. So if I have a song that I'm working on, if I have, for example, I make sample packs. So I may sit down and I may say, I'm sitting down today to make 808s, for example, or I'm sitting down today to make pads or leads or something like that. So when I first sit down to start my sound design session, I figure out why am I making these sounds? Because often the why leads you down. It kind of has you trend towards the goal of creating those sounds, and you end up reaching that goal. Then, like you, same thing that you do, I pick my weapon of choice. Just like it's like as if you're a warrior getting ready for battle. Are you going to use a sword? Are you going to use an axe? Are you going to use a hammer? So me knowing what my initial goal is, like if I'm sitting down to make 808s, I'm probably going to use a synth that makes great bass sounds. If I'm going to make pads, then I'm going to pick a synth that makes great pad sounds. And those may be different synths. Like I'm probably going to use, if I need bass sounds, I might use Operator. If I need pad sounds, I might use Wavetable, for example, or I might use Serum. Well, Serum kind of is good at making everything, but so I often end up picking Serum. So yeah, I pick my weapon of choice, and then I also, depending on what kinds of synths I'm using, I also try to pick out what kinds of post-processing I want to do on it. Even though I'm going to do most of the work inside of the synth that I'm using, I often will do a little bit of post-processing. So I kind of try to pick those out. And sometimes I'll even organize them on their own track and then drop them onto the synth to see in time, like during the sound design session, like what sounds good, what doesn't sound good. And then another thing that I also do, just like how you do it, where you do the different save states.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll create like, just like that, I'll create variations on the same preset. So like, I'll call it like sick bass preset 01, sick bass preset 02, sick bass, and then 03, 04. I'll create, say, 10 variations. They're all completely different, but they're based from the same initial like concept. So I may change some of the processing, I may change the sequencing or something like that. But they all started from that initial preset. And I also do the same thing where I have like a bass folder, a synth folder, or a lead folder, a pad folder. And I think that's really important to do. Another thing that I do, and this is something that's, I don't know if it's specific to Ableton, but you can save presets in Ableton with the post-processing in it. So you can save the chain, and I'll often save that preset and also the preset inside with all of the post-processing chain. And I'll save that to my user library in Ableton. And that way, when I want to use it in a track, I'll hear it exactly as I heard it during the sound design session. Because then I could just grab the preset and just drag it in there. And I have all the reverb and the distortion and all that stuff tucked in along with that initial preset. And that's something that I think a lot of people forget to do, and that forget that that DAWs are able.
Kind of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Grouping your effects for sure.
Group your effects, and I know Logic can do that too. Like you can save the entire signal chain along with the preset. So that's something I feel like a lot of people forget, but it's super duper useful.
That is.
So,
and a final thing about sound design is I like to save unevolved, I like to say, like unevolved sounds, something that isn't amazing and perfect and ready to be on the record, because in my opinion, if it is and you use it twice, then they're going to sound like you just use the same preset.
You just use the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll use like a sort of evolving, like something that's almost there, and I'll save it. That's the spot. And then I use that 100 times, and I let the rest of it kind of bloom into some crazy thing. And that kind of allows you to have a same sound, but then every song sounds different, and you're using a similar preset that you've designed. Yeah. So don't feel like my presets I wouldn't show people. I'm not like, hey, look how cool my sound is. See how cool? Because it's not cool until I process it.
That's actually, that's actually a really good point too, because when you have a fully processed sound, it's often hard to use that in a session. Because in the session, it sounds this like finished thing, but then the rest of your song doesn't sound finished. And so it's kind of hard to fit that puzzle piece in when it doesn't match everything else that's happening. Yeah.
What about moving on to actual production? What are some techniques you do when you're using these sounds in play? What are some stuff that you do in production world?
So in production, one thing that I do is I use the signal chains, and sometimes I'll save the signal processing chain that I developed during a sound design session, and I'll use that in a music production session. So like there's times where I've used, like for example, a vocal processing chain on like hi-hats or on something that has like a higher frequency in it, because vocals happen in the higher frequencies. So that's something I use a lot in music production. Like I said earlier, I use templates a lot. So during my production stage, when I sit down for the session, I often, instead of, like for me at least, this is just how I feel about it as an artist, is like when you have a completely blank session, it's like sitting down as an artist with a completely blank piece of paper. And you just have to fill the piece of paper with your ideas and with your art, basically. When it comes to music production, I usually am sitting down because I have to produce something. I have to produce a song for an artist, or I have to make something for TV commercial. It's very rare, especially now because music is my career. It's very rare now that I just sit down just to make something. Although I still do that. Sometimes I do make the time to just sit down just to make something from scratch. But other things that I do is I usually start with drums. When I'm making a song, that's usually the first thing that I do, is I set out some sort of drum loop or something along the lines. Because to me, this is my own personal opinion, but to me, the drums are kind of like, especially with the genres I make, like with pop and R&B and hip hop and electronic music, the drums are kind of like, it's like if the song were a body, it's like the skeleton, and everything else is kind of built onto the skeleton. And then I usually go from the drums, and then if I have like a melodic idea, I'll get the melodies down. And then I usually will try to, sometimes this switches around, but I'll usually do like a chord progression that fits well with the drums. So I'll try and make a chord progression and have the drums kind of working together. And that to me is like it's like now you've got the skeleton and you put the muscles over the skeleton. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then from there, I kind of start building on top of that. So what are some of your techniques that you use for music production?
I use pretty similar things to what you just said. I do have a little bit of a different order, and the order probably will change and has changed and continues to change. But here's some tips and ideas of what I like to do. The first thing, and maybe not in every situation, but something I like to be aware of is I choose my BPM and I sort of like find a key that I like. And I know that sounds like, okay, that sounds like music theory, like mindset and logistical, and we should not be as logistical to make music. But for me, speed is a bit important, and tone, if you want to think of key signature as tone, is a bit important. So if you're going to write something in a darker kind of sound, or you hear, if I hear a song and I hear the 808 and I'm like, whoa, I wonder what key signature that is. It sounds 808s sound very different in different keys. So for me, like you don't have, not everyone needs to make darker music, but for me, I find what is a darker kind of a sound. And then you got to keep in mind your bass line is going to be following the same key signature. Your pads, your low pass filtering, if you find like some like ethereal pad kind of a thing, your cutoff point is going to be at a specific whatever would sound good, and that's going to be relative to the key signature. So basically everything's based on this key signature. BPM in a way sets the genre nowadays.
Yeah,
and if you're doing
it sets the genre.
128, yeah, so it's like for me, I kind of find myself working at like 100 or 190 halftime or like 180 halftime, something like that. And I'm not sure why, but, or maybe another day I want to do 140 or 150 or 200 and something. So, and half times of those. And then another thing I do is I structure my song using ID tags or the markers inside of a DAW. So for me, I'll be like, this is the intro. It's 8 bars or 4 bars. And this is the verse. It's 16 bars. Here's the drop. It's 16 or 32 bars. So I that's probably cheesy and like something that you can predict. It's predictable. But for me, it helps me understand the amount of buildup I have left until I flip it to the drop, or the amount of tension that you can use. So it sort of like sets the range of time I have to produce a feeling. You know, because during the build-up, you want them to feel tense and you want them to feel like, oh my God, and scared and weird. And then the drop, they should not feel that.
They should feel the release. The release of tension.
Opposite of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then like you, I lay out the drums. That's like the first thing I do. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I probably use the same like kick for everything, man.
I think I use the same like 3 kicks for everything.
And then snares, just find some good snares that are cool.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. It just, I layer the hell out of snares. Something that I think is very much overlooked, and it doesn't matter in this stage. It will matter in mixing, but you can be cognitive of it now, is phase relationship between kick and snares. And if you use 14 different snares, maybe they should sort of be in phase in the production. You don't have to. Reason I'm saying you don't have to, you don't want to get too logistical. You're creative. When you start getting too logistical, I stop being creative and I start just being angry. So, which leads to creativity. So I'm saying don't be too logistical, man. When you're doing this, it doesn't matter. Clipping doesn't matter. Mixing doesn't matter. Metering doesn't matter. Our goal is to produce. We want to make an amazing song. And if you can make an amazing song, and you didn't mess with the phase relationship, well, you worry about it in the mix. That's what that's for. Exactly. If you say, I'm going to worry about it now because I want to, don't stress yourself out. If it doesn't stress you out, go ahead and do it. And then after that, the last 2 things I do, I choose samples, and I will use samples. And if later I say, I don't want to use this sample, then I'll replace it with something that you made. But when I'm saying samples, I mean like an impact. I don't want to make an impact sound, so I'll use an impact, or I'll use
and they all sound the same anyways.
A whoosh sound, or you know, these kinds of things. And then finally, I pick my presets. So I make all my songs with presets, and guess who made them? My previous self. So that's what my sound design sessions lie, is now I have all these presets. And now, because sometimes you get logistical when you're like, I'm making this preset. Is it clipping? It shouldn't matter, right? None of that should matter. What should matter is, does it sound dope?
Does it sound good? Yeah.
So if you can complete your session and it sounds good, then I'd say it was success. So that's what I do in a production session. And then I move on to the mixing session.
And then mixing, I think that's
session.
I think that's an important point to make, especially for younger, less experienced producers. When you're making a song, when you're starting the production of the song, like in the creative process of the song, don't worry about mixing things. Like, don't worry about EQing, don't worry about compression, unless it's informing your creativity. That's the only time you should be worried about it, is if you filter something or if you EQ something and it creates a different sound and that sound is informing your creativity.
Or
Otherwise,
if you do everything
just make
in
it
one
dope.
session. If I've met people who are like, I do it all in one session.
True. I'm like that. I will say, like, I do mix as I create. Like, I mix as I move along, but it's a lot easier when you're a little bit more experienced, but because they're kind of like different mental spaces. But as you get more experienced and get better at music production, you'll know what kinds of mix decisions to make while you're making the song.
CPU.
So I think it's kind of
That's
kind of like
CPU.
But I think you have to kind of like switch hats a little bit. Like music production hat is like fully creative, just make something awesome. And then mixing hat is like science. It's like, I'm no longer artist, and now I'm putting on science hat. Mm-hmm. And I have to figure out the actual physics of the sound and what frequency sounds right with what other frequency. What frequencies do I need to cut out? Which ones should I add in? And you kind of are moving from, like you said, you're moving more from like a art brain to more of a logistical, like science brain.
For sure.
That's the transition between music production and then a mixing session. So what are some of the ways that you start your mixing sessions?
Well, it is a good, again, point to make that I do separate all studio work into 3 mindsets. You could say 4 if you want to say sound design is one of them, but I just think production, mixing, mastering, and I'm separate people with all of those. With production, like I just said, who cares if it's clipping? I would not want to say that in mixing because it's pretty
that's
important.
An issue in mixing,
for sure. So something I do when I'm mixing is I start a brand new session every single time. And then I set up a mixing session. I do different ways in different DAWs. There's some content on the blog that describes the ways that I do that. But one thing, regardless of a computer, the most important thing I do anytime I'm going to mix is I get the client's reference track. I say, what is something that you think is dope? What is something you want to sound like? What do you think is the greatest mix you've ever heard in your life, or the greatest song that exists on planet Earth? They send that to me, and I just listen to it in every single speaker system, and I tune my brain to be that. So this is what I want. Is all I think of is that. I don't really listen to the client's track much. I calibrate the meters, all the meters, whatever I'm going to need for the session, to this reference track while it's playing. I play it in my iPhone. I play it on YouTube. I play it everywhere. Then I skim briefly through the client's track, just like ba, 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 very quick, nothing. I'm not going to listen to it because you need to be very careful that you don't get
too familiar.
Well, yeah, that you don't start to be like, wow, this sounds really good. Because if you say this sounds really good, I feel you have just lost all credibility to mix that song. Because the reason they sent it to you is it doesn't sound very good. If it sounded very good, you wouldn't exist. So you got to be careful not to think, oh, it's very good. You think of, okay, it's not like the reference track, and it needs to be like the reference track. And then I A-B, A-B, A-B until it does. In which case I'm done. And that's my how I start and get the ball rolling in a mixing session. What about you? Do you have any other kind of things you would add into that?
Yeah, so objectivity. That's what you're talking about, objectivity. Like staying objective and not being too familiar and not being too, I guess for lack of a better term, emotionally attached to it.
For sure.
Because having that detachment from the song is super important to get a good mix, to get a mix that sounds good. Because if you like something, then you're going to make different decisions towards it. Exactly. So if you really like a bass or something like that, or you really like the way the drums sound, then you're not going to make them sound good. They're just going to be something you're like, oh, I like that, so I'm not going to treat them as much. I'm not going to make decisions that lead you to making them sound better. Usually when I start a mix session, I like doing my mixing in the morning. That's just how I like mixing things. I usually like to wake up, work out, eat breakfast, et cetera, do all those good things, shower. But then when I sit down to mix, I usually like it being the first thing that's in my ears. Mm-hmm. I usually will listen to the song Especially like I have a client right now, I'm mixing their song. The first thing I do in the morning is I pull in all the stems. I make sure everything's 24-bit, 44.1, or 48K if it's like for a film thing or something like that. And it's the very first thing I listen to. So I listen to it with no opinion on it whatsoever, just fresh ears. It's the first thing that's heading into my headphones or playing out of the monitors. That way, everything that I hear is as objective as it can be. Like me just being a human being, as objective as it can be. Because if you start mixing and you've been listening to things all day, A, you have ear fatigue. B, you've had all these different influences on your mind all day. So like if you're mixing at 7, 8, 9 p.m., you have a whole day that you've experienced that could be affecting the way that you're hearing the song. So I like to do it right when I wake up, as close to as when I woke up as possible, so that I can actually have a more objective hearing experience while I'm listening to it.
That's really cool. I actually do the very same thing when I'm done the final day after, just to listen to it to make sure I wasn't crazy. I'm like, okay, let me
I do
make
that
sure.
too.
Yeah.
I
That's
double
awesome.
check like fresh ears. I double check like when the mix and the master is done.
Yep.
I literally will first thing in the morning, even if it's like on my phone and I'm playing it in my headphones, I just listen to it just like raw. First thing in the morning, first thing I listen to, like, did I make good decisions? Does it sound good still? Because even if you're working on something, like say you work on it all day, you work on it for 6 hours. Towards the end, your ears are getting a little tired, you're getting used to the sounds, you're starting to get attached to sounds. You have to kind of double check your own work the next day and say, like, did I do a good job on this? Did I stay objective? Did I remove the things that don't sound good and make things that do sound good sound better? And yeah, that's kind of how I approach mixing sessions. And I often will, especially if I'm working on someone else's work, I often will have them, even if they work in the same DAW that I work in, I'll have them send me stems specifically, because when you get someone else's session and it has all of the processing, all the VSTs and all that stuff on it, A, they may not open up on your computer. B, it's going to have a different sound to it than if it's just audio. So it's better to get full stems and like get everything stemmed out and then import those stems in. Another thing too, this is something for more music producers, when you're sending your stems to a mix engineer, always label everything and make sure that there's no silent tracks. There's no, like for example, I got this session, this is maybe like 2 years ago, but I got this session and like half the tracks were just completely silent. And it was because the initial producer, he sent it to me and he was like, oh, I just created a bunch of tracks because I was using a template at first, but like I deleted all the things off of the template and I just like left the tracks. But he just exported the stems, not realizing that half the tracks were empty. So like just go through before you send it off to get mixed, just go through and clean up your session, like label things. Because you were working on your session, you know what everything is. You know that audio track 11 is hi-hats. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to the mix engineer who's just opening this up for the first time, to them, it just says audio track 11. And now we have to listen to it like, what is that? But then it takes 30 seconds to listen to that. But if the song is 80 tracks deep, then now we've spent an hour just listening to and organizing things instead of just mixing the song.
For sure.
So,
I
yeah.
definitely will never accept a session. Only stems. And with the stems, I personally don't want them labeled, just because I've had a lot of clients that will be like, Australian wood block number 6. It's just something that it's like, what does that mean? So or maybe they write bass and then they decide to put the guitar there and now it's a guitar and it says bass. So I will always just I don't care what it says. I'll listen to each one and I'll name it.
I listen to each
10
stem,
names, and the 10 names are just very basic, like pad, bass, strings,
rename all the tracks,
whatever. Sub, metal. So these kinds of things are very general. And I will also, something else I do, I will charge the client per stem when I'm working with a client. So this makes them, because I've had clients be like, oh, can you mix my song? And I'm like, sure. And then they send me 300 stems. And I'm like,
Oh,
I didn't
boy.
sign up for this. So charging per stem, you can name any price you want for your own studios. This enables people to be like, hey, I'm going to make sure that I only send what I need. I'm only going to send you 5 stems or 9. Generally, it's about 11 stems people will send. But this cuts it down, because if you have 37 basses, turn it into 1, or turn it into 2, because that can be mixed down a little further. And plus, a lot of times, I'll just group a bunch of stuff anyways and just sort of macro process that. And if I need
like all the basses go in the bass group.
And if there's a problem or a confliction, I'll go in and surgically adjust it. But a lot of times, guys, just group things. It's going to be okay as long as there's as long as you have some
group
awareness
similar
of phase
things,
and it's EQ'd,
group similar things
to make room for sub and other things like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. Like grouping things, similar frequency sets. So like, for example, if we're just talking about drums, the bass drum goes with all the other bass drums. So if you have multiple different bass drums, put them all together in a group. If you have snares, a bunch of different snares, group them together. If you have a bunch of different tops, like hi-hats and cymbals and crashes and all those things, those all go together. Like toms and other percussion, like congos and bongos and all that, group those together, because those are all, frequency-wise, they're all going to live together. So those are things that should be grouped together. So yeah, that's a very, very, very good point, because then I think I might actually take your advice and start charging per stem, because I have gotten tracks before that were like I don't know, like 200 tracks, like stems before that were like 200 tracks. And then I drop it into my session, and one of the tracks is just like a doom, and that's it for 3 minutes. It's just doom.
That was not my idea. Shout out to Abe. He gave me that idea. But yeah, that's some
very good idea.
Some stuff that definitely lets people know, like, hey, this is a business, and I'm not just like,
and my time is important, and you're paying me for my time.
Exactly. And if I walk into a grocery store, I have to pay for each item. I'm not just going to say I want food, and I'm going to fill a cart with food, and I'm going to pay $100. That'll be great, but you got to pay for each item. So it's very similar.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. So when it comes to mastering, I follow a really similar, exact same thing as mixing. I do things a little different. Now, the first thing I'm going to do in a mastering session is I'm going to, like I said, listen to that reference track in as many speakers as I can. I'm also going to listen to that reference track explicitly in my iPhone. Then I'm going to flip it to mono, and I'm going to listen to mono and how the reference track sounds in mono. This gives me a great idea of what the client's expectations are of mono compatibility for their track. It also gives me a good expectations of what their client wants their track to sound like in an iPhone and all other speakers. So if you're noticing like big room house or something, a genre where it's super wide, and you notice in mono parts disappear, well, the client probably wants the exact same experience. You don't need to make everything physically balanced. If you're noticing that in speakers it sounds really dirty and noisy like GarageBand in your iPhone or something, they probably want that same grit in their music. So a lot of times I look for their intent. What was their goal? What were they trying to do? What were they trying to achieve? What emotion were they trying to capture? And I sort of put that into my mindset when I'm starting a session for mastering. And beyond that, the final thing I do is I try and get it done as fast as I can, like 5 or 10 minutes even. And then I get up and I walk away and I forget everything I did, and I just like think of something else, and I come back maybe anytime later, right? And 90% of the master is already done for you. Then I just go in and I'm subtly adjusting the processors that my previous self did without any subconscious distraction of saying, is that good or is that not good? Should I have done that? Or you don't have time to think. You're just busting it out in about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's say, okay, that's good enough. That's great. You get up and leave, come back, and I double check every processor, and then I go in with my meters and I really fine tune it. But 90% of all of the work is done if you do it without using your subconscious or only use your subconscious. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I just know that if you don't think and you just do, and you only
Trust
give yourself
your
a
instincts.
limited amount of time, it's going to sound really good. Even better than if you really give it everything you have and sit there for days and days and days.
Yeah.
So what about you? What do you do for mastering situations?
So mastering, I work in a very similar way. I try to do the same thing where my mix is done. I've double checked my mix. And then on the master, I try to start with fresh ears. Just come in. I haven't done anything else. And usually I'm familiar with the song by now. But with mastering, the point of mastering is to get your volume level up to a commercial volume level. So it sounds like volume levels of other songs that are in the similar genre or in the same genre as the song that you're mastering. Then you want your master to sound good on every playback system. So that's why, like Jordan was saying, that's why you want to double check on your iPhone speaker. You want to double check on headphones. You want to double check on your AirPods. You want to double check in the car. The car is probably the most brutal and most honest playback system because you can hear every little detail. And yeah, playing on good speakers, playing on bad speakers, you want your master to sound good across all these different things. So when you're coming into mastering with a fresh set of ears, you're kind of automatically letting yourself know, like, just even in a subconscious way, like start from an objective standpoint so that you can make good mastering decisions. And getting familiar with the reference track is really, really, really important because that's usually the reference track is what the client, when they were making the song, that's what they were going for.
Paid
and
for
so
it, maybe.
Yeah.
Paid
Exactly.
Maybe they bought
Paid
the
for
record.
it.
Maybe they bought the shirt. Maybe they bought more stuff
Exactly.
because it sounded so good or they
Exactly.
liked the way that it sounded. So yeah.
Exactly. So that's usually like the goal. And what I do is I will buy the reference track and I'll buy the wave file of the reference track. So if it's on Beatport or Amazon or Tidal or whatever, I try to buy the wave file, the actual uncompressed wave file. And I'll drag that into my session and then I'll put Wave's loudness meter on there. And then I can see all of the dynamic range. I can see the decibel reading. And what I do in my own track, when I'm mastering their track, I try to hit similar numbers. Maybe not the exact same numbers because I'm still using my ears more than I'm using my eyes because sometimes something will sound better even though I'm not hitting the exact same numbers. It sounds similar enough to the reference where I'm hitting my goal properly. And so I tend to be a little bit more exact when I'm doing mastering. And like you said, this is a really good point. Like you said, I try to do it really quickly. I try to get it done as fast as possible. Because to me, when you sit with a master too long, it starts to sound overworked and it starts to sound like you're getting further and further away from the reference. Because usually your first impression of the reference track is good enough to get you to that point with your own masters. So if you're familiar with the reference, you use that as a reference. And I usually will do most of the like adjusting of the compressors and adjusting of the EQ and things like that. I'll do it within 10, 15 minutes. And I do the same thing. I'll go and do something else. Like I'll go to the bathroom or go eat or something like that. And I won't touch that master session for a couple of hours sometimes. And then I'll come back to it. And by then, that's when I'll pull up the wave loudness meter and then match it. And then I'll do a small tweaks of like changing things of like 1 dB sometimes. But most of the time when I come back, it's done. It's pretty much done. That's why a lot of mastering engineers, they'll tell you like, if you pay an extra fee, like I can have the master done for you in 30 minutes. And that's a sign of a good mastering engineer is they can get things done quickly. And yeah, that's kind of
really
how
cool.
I go about doing it.
Yeah. I think it's really important to do a check with your ears, a check with your eyes, and then try to flip to the reference and see how it compares against it.
Yeah.
It's important to make it sound good on every system, and it's also important to
Yeah.
make it sound good in the client's expectations, even if it sounds questionable in the realms of physics on all systems.
Yeah.
The number one goal is you want the client to be happy, so they will send you their next master, and you also
Exactly.
want to somehow make it good enough so you are happy and you can put it in your
Yeah.
portfolio.
And you can be proud of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a matter of, give it everything you got. It doesn't need to be perfect, never will be. No master is ever finished or ever, if I lose the session, I'll do the whole thing all over again, totally different. And then also one last thing I wanted to add is when I'm adding all these processors and walking away and coming back, Only thing I'm doing when I come back is undoing things, taking things off, deleting things, removing things. I'm never adding more. And then I'll do some of the adjustments with meters and calibrations and this and that, and then it's good.
Yeah.
So don't overwork it.
Yeah.
Don't send the client 15 versions and say which do you like the best. That's a bad
Never
thing.
do that. Never
just
do
send
that.
them one when you think it's done and don't say it sounds done. Don't say is it done. Be like it's done. And have the confidence to know that it's done. That confidence will relay to the client, because it's almost like this. When you're on, when you go see a doctor and they're like, hey, you're healthy. That's great, right? But maybe they could like look at you on a super microscopic level and be like, I don't know, find one possible.
Yeah, your blood pressure's a little bit high.
Or like,
you're a little bit stressed
there's
out.
bacteria. There's bacteria all over human beings' bodies, like, you know, because
all the time.
But we can't see them because I would have a panic attack my whole life if I could see them all over me. So that's the reason we don't see them. And this is the kind of very similar experience to how we have a wonderful existence and everything's smooth and calm, and we're not freaking out about bacteria crawling all over us all the time, because we've maintained a very similar mindset to how we have to in a mastering situation for studios.
Exactly.
So let's talk about working with clients in a session.
Yeah.
How to start a session for a client, okay? The number one thing I want to say here, guys, be careful who you invite over to your studio. Okay, this is your studio. Be careful. I mean, people have friends. People are people. Just be careful. Be safe. Know your clients. All right, moving on. Number one goal of having any client, working with any clients, the number one thing you need to do, if you're a pilot, if you're a doctor, or if you are an audio engineer working in a studio, zero stress. There should be no stress.
Yes.
Everything is always cool.
Yes.
Don't ever get upset. Don't freak out. Don't be, oh, I don't know what's going on. Oh, there's turbulence.
Never say that.
You know, the pilot, he's always like, everything's great, guys.
Everything's fine.
Yeah, he's not like,
there could be
boy, I didn't learn
sensors
about
going
this one
off
in flight school.
Yeah.
All right, so next up, I want to make sure all my files are loaded. If your files are not loaded, you're going to look real dumb. Where are my files? I don't know. The client's coming there. Make sure it's loaded. Have all the equipment turned on. If you have things like tubes or consoles or anything, you don't want to have to wait for them to turn on, warm up, and get to the right operating level till you can use them. You don't want to be looking for cables, saying, I don't have a cable. Next, temperature should be right. Your studio should be on the colder side, but don't have it be sweating so much heat. The artist comes in, they're drenched, dripping water all over the place.
Better cold than hot.
Yes, but don't have it freezing. Next, your studio should smell clean. Don't have it smell like a toilet. It's not a toilet. Don't have it smell weird. Have it smell clean. It's a studio. It's a recording studio. When the client gets there, the first thing you do, you let them do anything they want. If they want to go outside to smoke or have a drink, whatever they want to do to get in the role of the artist.
Get in the zone.
Let them do it.
Yeah.
Next, hand them their very own pair of headphones. This is something that will allow them to know they're in a studio setting, they're working on a project. It is their instrument at this point, is their headphones. Next, I'm going to hand them a pencil and I'm going to hand them a paper. This will come in handy if they have any ideas to write down. A lot of times, they're not going to be on their phone. They might be on their phone, but just give them a pen and paper anyways. Next, I'm going to give my clients a snack pack. That you can make it however you want. Snack pack's got some kind of a bagged food and some kind of a bottled beverage, like water, preferably. So you give them a pack of food and water. They're like, all right, great. Now I'm going to show them where the bathroom is. If they have to go, let them know. And then the most important thing you do, turn off your phone and put it away. Turn off everything that you could ever communicate with another human and put it away. They are paying you to focus on them. They are not paying you to text your mom. They're not paying you to look at your email. They're paying you to record them. So make sure you focus on the client. Then begin, and don't forget, take physical studio notes on paper. Okay, while you're working the entire time, like vocal level here, I added this at this level. Just write it down, and you can stick it in the client's folder later. So God forbid you lose any digital thing, you have the physical studio notes for that session, for that song in the folder, because somebody is paying you to do this. That is my tips for working with a client. What do you got, Jamal?
Yes, those are all amazing tips and very clearly like veteran tips. So those are tips that some things I think people take for granted, but those small details really, really work out so that the session runs smoothly.
For sure.
For me, like I said earlier, the very first thing I do, I usually show up early. And I feel like if you show up early, you kind of already put yourself in that not stressed mental state. Because if you're late, you're showing up stressed and you're bringing that stressful energy with you. If you're early, you walk in, you're relaxed, you can take your time with everything. You can take your sweet time, you can eat, you can do whatever you like. Show up early, turn on all the equipment, make sure you put out all of your microphones, your cabling, all the things you think you're going to need. If you're doing, it depends on the session. If you're doing a more vocal oriented session, make sure that the space that you're going to be recording in feels nice. It could be that like, if the studio allows you to, you could light some incense or sage, or I've seen people like put candles and things like that on. Like if it's an R&B thing, you want people to walk into like good vibes. Another thing too, always know where the bathroom is. You yourself, even if it is someone else's studio, you yourself should know how to direct the artist how to get to the bathroom. So you should always know where things are. Like, how do they get in and out of the studio? What's the code for the door? Like things like that. You should be the person that just knows that right off the bat. And I often write it down. Sometimes I'll put it on my phone. Sometimes I'll have a little piece of paper I put it on. And I'll just put it on the desk so that I can just be like this. And same thing with the Wi-Fi code. Like usually the artist is going to want to know what the Wi-Fi code is.
Good point, yeah.
Things like that are small things, but that make the client more comfortable, and it makes them feel like you know what you're doing. You're in control. You know everything about the studio. So for them, it's really, when you have a client, it's really about making sure that the client is comfortable, because you as an engineer, you're kind of like, and as a music producer, you're kind of like the director trying to get the best performance out of the actor. And that's really what you're doing as a producer, as an engineer in the studio. You're just capturing a moment. You're capturing a performance.
Producing
and everything that needs to happen, exactly. Everything that needs to happen in order for the artist to get into that mind state, that's what needs to happen. So it could be that the artist is super duper nervous. You do whatever you start, like, for example, I have had artists come in, they were super nervous, and I just start joking around with them. I just start telling jokes and just being funny, because no matter what, people stop being nervous if everybody's laughing. You automatically start to kind of calm down and like stop being so nervous if everybody's having fun and enjoying themselves. That's really something that I feel like people look over. Is like, oh, I'm at work, I have to be very serious. It's like, it doesn't always have to be serious. It can just be a fun, good time, and you end up getting a better performance out of your artist because they're enjoying themselves. Another thing is always, always, always have water, have some sort of liquids. Most of the time, I offer in the beginning of the session, I offer the clients water or something to drink, like juice, anything like that. Because the way the vocal cords work is, in order for them to be properly hydrated, you drink water, but the hydration actually goes down a different pipe. It's not like you drink water and the water passes over your vocal cords, because then you would choke, you would drown. You actually have to drink water probably 30 minutes to an hour before that water actually makes it to hydrate your vocal cords. So usually when the client first walks in, I offer them something to drink, something along those lines, so that when we get into the recording, when their vocals get warmed up, then their vocals are hydrated. And their throat is hydrated, like everything, they sound a lot better than they would have had they said, like, they started singing, they started rapping, and then they're like, dang, I'm really thirsty right now. That's a little bit too late. If they've already started recording and they're starting to get thirsty, it's a little bit too late. So immediately at the beginning of the session, I always offer some water or something along those lines. Another thing too is, just don't, I've had this experience before, don't bring food or, I guess, fragrant food into a studio. And that could be burgers, it could be fish, especially not fish. Don't bring fragrant food into a studio ever, because the studio is it's literally built as almost like I forgot what the word is, but an airtight
absorption chamber.
Yeah, an airtight absorption chamber.
For sure.
So that smell is going to stay there. It's going to live there.
And if clients
So-
bring stinky food, just be like, hey, all of this
Can
stuff
you-
is going to
yeah.
absorb that. So it's because of my sound treatment, sound, whatever you want to
Yeah.
say.
It's going to
that's
stay
a nice way
in,
to say,
in
get that out
the
of there.
foam.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like eat it out in the lounge or something like that because the smell's going to stay in there. You're just going to have to smell.
Have somewhere for them to eat
Fish
it.
the whole
Don't be
time.
like, go outside and eat in the street. You know,
Yeah,
have somewhere
yeah.
else they can go that isn't the studio.
Yeah.
Those are awesome,
exactly.
awesome tips. Seriously.
Yeah.
Very good tips.
And what else is there? And honestly, I echo all the things that you said too. Like keeping the room a little bit cold. Because if it's a little hot, then everyone's kind of uncomfortable, a little bit sweaty. You don't want that like sweaty stickiness happening in the studio.
No, you do not.
And yeah, that's kind of just make sure everyone is comfortable and make sure that everybody can be their best. That's really what it's about.
So
Yeah.
those are some amazing tips. You know what you're talking about when it comes to working with clients. That's some good stuff.
Yeah, you do too.
If you guys ever need any advice on working with clients, best way to get it is to work with clients and figure it out for yourself.
Yes.
Because all this
Yes.
stuff I learned was through learning the wrong way, like doing it the wrong way and being like,
Doing the
what
wrong
have
way
I
first.
done? And then fixing it. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the end of the session, there's also some really important techniques, tips, and tricks to do to close a session. This is something that's
Yes.
as equally as important as starting a session because it bridges the path from the end to the beginning. This is literally, in a sense, setting you up for the next session, bringing our conversation back to the very beginning, the night before. This could be considered the night before, how to end a session. So typically, it's at the end of the day or in the morning if it's a late session. So here's something I always like to think about when I'm ending a session and even when I have studio notes. When I take studio notes when I'm working on my own music or clients' music, I have all these ideas and I say like, oh, I need to do this with this element, this with this element, this with this. I write those down because I'm not remembering past 2 or 3 of those ideas. So I'm writing them down and I put a checkbox.
Yeah.
As I accomplish each one, I check the checkbox. Now, when I have checked all the boxes, I guess it's done and I'll give it another listen. Now, Ernest Hemingway would not finish his very last sentence when he knew what it was, so he could wake up the next day and he knew exactly where to pick it up and he got the ball rolling. So this is something that helps me get ready every single day. Is I don't check all those boxes off. I'll leave a couple on there. So I wake up the next day, boom, I start checking the rest of the boxes off. By the end of that day, I have some more stuff I have to do. So whereas if I accomplish every single thing for that entire day, I wake up and then I'm on like the internet and because I'm like,
You're like, what do I have to do?
I'm like, oh, I
today?
guess I did it all, you know, or I start
Yeah.
another song or I start getting like confused and distracted because the world has so much going on that you're like, well, I'll make a new song. I'll start a band. I'll start a new project. I could do this.
Yeah.
Wow. I'll
Yep.
make a podcast. Like, it's like,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
so much stuff. So, it's very important to leave a little something for you to do. Like leave some. And
Yeah.
another thing is
It keeps you focused.
I will just make a book of all of my tracks for my album that if I'm working on an album and in that book, I'll have notes for every single song. And I'm just like, I won't even do it. I'm like, here's my activity book. So then I'm like, wake up, I'm going to work on some music. You open the book and start checking off those boxes. So this is something that I feel is extremely important for me even getting back to work when I stop a session. What are some tips that you do
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
working by yourself with a session, Jamal?
When I'm working by myself with a session, usually when I end a session, it depends on like what point the song is in. And usually, let's say we're talking about like when I'm done like making the song, like the end of the music production process. Usually what I do is I kind of go through the session and I save the things that I possibly want to use for other sessions. So I make a list of things like, I really like the way this kick drum sounds. I'm going to save this kick drum, or I'm going to export like this MIDI because I like how this chord progression sounds and I might want to use that in a different song. So I'll go through and all the elements that I made specific to that song, if I want to use it in another song, I will kind of export those bits and pieces or save presets
smart.
or whatever so that later on, like future Jamal is going to be way happy about that because I'm like, oh, what's that one bass sound? Oh wait, it's over here. I usually will label it the day that I made it, and sometimes I'll name it the song too because song names change though, so that's not that helpful. But the date always helps.
That's
the time
really
that I made it.
Advice. I cannot tell you how many times I've been like, I'm going to open this session again, 45 sessions just to find the one synth preset I didn't save. I'm like, I hear it later. I'm like, whoa, who made that? Oh, I guess I did. And I was like, oh, I don't know where it is now. So, but yeah,
that's why I started doing it.
Incredible advice.
That's literally why, because I've lost so many really, really dope sounds that, like, for example, there's songs that I have out now that are like some of my biggest songs. And I'm like, I don't remember what session that's in. I don't remember what preset that is. Like there's 30 different versions of this song. I don't know which one particular sound is in.
Yeah.
So I just made a decision one day. I was like, never again. I'm going to start exporting these things. And it's something, it takes 10 minutes to do that.
Exactly.
And it takes really
years
easy
to find again.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, exactly. It'll take years to find that session. And then another thing that I do is if I'm at a studio, I zero out. I do what's called zeroing out. So like if you're using a console, that means setting all the EQs to noon, like putting them all straight up, leaving the studio better than when you came in. That's something when I was younger, that's something I made the mistake of not doing, is just like leaving, just like walking out the door, like packing up and just walking out. And then I've gotten yelled at by the studio manager the next morning. So that's one thing to never do. Always zero out everything. And that includes like probably the most important thing to do is turn down the volume knob and mute the volume knob on, if you have like a monitor system, like a big knob or something like that, turn down the volume, mute it, because when people come in the next day or the next session, they're going to plug in everything. You don't want the speakers to start blaring music. You want them to be like, I don't hear anything. Oh, wait, let me turn the volume up. Another thing is I do what's called a collect all and save in Ableton. So I collect all of the recordings, all of the samples I used, everything into that Ableton session. And then I immediately put it on an external hard drive immediately. That's something, because I have a hard drive that is Velcroed to the back of my laptop. So that session, if I have made everything in that session, I immediately put it on that external hard drive, because then if my computer crashes, if it gets stolen or something like that, then I always will have that session, even though it's on a separate hard drive, then I know that I have it somewhere else.
Not if it's Velcroed to your laptop and that got stolen. That would be bad.
Yeah, true. True. But sometimes I'll even upload to my Google Drive too.
Oh, always,
like if I'm really,
always.
If I'm really excited about a session, like there was this session that I made I think I was in the Philippines when I made it, and I made the session while I was in the airport, and luckily I had like Wi-Fi there, and so I uploaded the session, and then I made it on my last laptop, and then I went to open it up. This is maybe like a month later, because I was on tour at the time, so I like was on tour. Like I made this song during waiting for a flight. Made the song, really cool song. I exported it, so I had a bounce of the song, but then I went to open that session up again on my old laptop, and it's an old laptop. All the presets were set to default. All the mixing changes and all the things that I did, all the work that I did on the airport, when I opened that session, it was all gone. Ugh. Like, I don't know why. I don't really know. It could just be because my computer's old.
X-ray machine.
But exactly. Yeah. Yeah, the X-ray machine wiped everything. But I opened the session up and nothing was how I wanted it to. But luckily, I uploaded that session in the state that I was in to Google Drive. And then this is maybe 6 months later, I was able to download it and then open it up on my new computer, and everything was there. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Like the presets were right. So that's one reason why I do that now, is because I realize like, oh, even though my computer is fine, the session might not be fine. So that's a good way to kind of keep track of things when you're closing out your session.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of your computer, do you leave your computer on, or do you shut off your computer when you're working on your computer on a personal session? So let's say you're in the middle of something, okay? Do you shut it off at night, or do you leave it going?
I always, pretty much 9 times out of 10, I turn my computer off. I shut it down.
That's
Like
awesome.
fully shut down. I know some people will put their computer to sleep or something like that. I shut it down, and there's multiple reasons why, like computer reasons why.
Let's hear
I
'em.
don't know.
Oh, you don't know.
But I don't know all of them. I know some of them, but one of them is that the cache on your in the DAW, and then just like the way that your computer runs, it allows the cache to reset, and it also allows your RAM to reset. It allows your CPU to have a break, because if you don't fully turn your computer off, your CPU has been running all night. It's going to be warm.
It's
going to
hot.
be running hotter. Yeah.
I
So
definitely
I always
sometimes-
shut down at the end of the night.
I'm 50-50, you know. One time I had a laptop and I don't think it ever was turned off, and it did.
Yeah.
It didn't live. This one I'm on is a 2012, and I'm 50-50 with it. You know, if I'm really deep in something working, I will leave it on overnight because that's more important.
Yeah.
But if I'm just normal, normally I just force quit Ableton, so it saves exactly where you are, and you don't have to wait for it to save.
That's smart.
And then,
you can just open it up in that state.
just don't hit
Yeah.
don't open again, you know, the option. Do you want to reopen your session? Don't hit no. But
Yeah.
that's something.
Yes, I want to reopen my
That's
session.
something that I do when I want to shut down. The only reason I like to shut down is because it makes your computer cold when you get to start again in the morning. And when I start on a hot computer, I start getting sweaty, and I don't like being sweaty when I make music. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
and you got to touch it.
That's
So
the worst.
in terms of clients, when you're ending a client session, this is a bit different from when I'm ending my own personal session. Some of the things that I do when I am ending a client session is I take all the studio notes that I've been compiling and or that I've been writing, and I compile them together. So I put all of their studio notes together, put a paperclip, put a staple, something. Physical notes. You put them together in a folder. Next, I'm going to take my phone, because we all have a phone, take pictures of any physical settings. So if you use a guitar amp or you use external processors, take pictures. If you're using a console, you're actually going to take pictures or draw every single knob into a blank chart that they would have. But nowadays, just take a picture with your phone, and then you can turn all the knobs back when you zero them out at the end.
Exactly.
Additionally, take screenshots of your processors. If it's for a client, take screenshots of the processors and put them in a folder, because what if you lose the session? What if your hard drive, what if something happens and you don't have it and you have to redo it all again? At least you have some of the settings. You don't have to like worry about it. Next, double save that session. What double save means? Save it to 2 spots. That's obviously what it means. So triple save. I don't do as many saves as you can, but save it multiple times. Additionally, like Jamal said, collect all and save. If it's another DAW, just make sure it takes the sample files and puts them into that folder so you can open them again. Additionally, clouds are cool. Save it to the cloud. They will save
it to the
your
cloud.
life. Save everything to the cloud. Finally, render a scratch version, give it to the client. Don't give them a high quality, amazing version, but you want them to like have something to show their friends and have a reason to come back. You don't want them to be like, oh, who cares anyways? You'd be like, here's my song. It's sounding good. It's going to be finished. I'm going to finish it at the studio. I'm going to finish it. As opposed to, I think we were working on a song, but I don't even remember how it sounds anymore because he won't let me hear it until I pay him. That's not a good experience.
That's horrible. And then don't do that.
The final thing, when the client leaves, make sure they have all their stuff they came with. If you do not want to shut your whole studio down and then they call you in an hour and say, if they left their phone, they wouldn't call you. Maybe they call you from another phone. They say, hey, I left my phone there. We got to go back now. And you can't say no because they're your client. So it's like, that'll be very annoying. Just say, hey, do you have all your stuff?
That's happened to me before too.
Exactly. So this is just some checklists you can do. What do you do when you are closing a session with a client, Jamal? What are some tips and tricks that you want to tell our listeners?
So one of the main things I do is always, always, always give the client something to leave with from that day's work. Always. It could not sound the way it needs to sound. It could if it's a vocal session, like obviously you haven't mixed the vocals yet, just give them something that they can listen back to, and they could even, usually what I do is I'll email them an MP3 of a bounce, for example. So it's not like obviously it's not like the final product, but it's something that they leave the session with, and everyone feels like, okay, we got something done today.
Exactly.
We produced something. Like I paid this person, they gave me something. That's one thing that you have to do as an engineer, because then everyone feels better about it. I also do that because then they can give me notes. Then they can say, well, I like how this sounds here. I don't like how this sounds there. Can you do this? Can you do that? That gives me the ability to then do what they say, what they're asking for, without even having to do extra work. Like I just send them the bounce as it is. And before I even get started mixing the vocals, for example, they've already gave me a list of tasks to complete. And then I already had a list in my own head, but then they also now are able to input into that. So that's one of the main things to do. Always send a bounce with your client when you're done working on something the day of. Another thing to do is make sure that when you guys are leaving, like you said, double check. I call it the dummy check. Just make sure, do a dummy check of the studio. Make sure no one's left anything like USBs. That's happened to me before where like we left the USB plugged into the studio computer.
Yeah, like phone chargers for sure.
Yeah, phone chargers, phone cables, like things like that. Really small things that people tend to forget. Just do a dummy check. Just go like make sure. Usually what I'll do is I'll pack up all my stuff, go put it in the car, come back. And even if I know, if I in quotes know that there's nothing left, I just walk around the entire room. I walk to all four corners, look across everywhere, check under couches, like do a very, very thorough dummy check just to make sure. Because there's been times where I found people's phones underneath a couch or like underneath a table or a USB or a CD or something. So always do the dummy check, always. Another thing with a client session, obviously you should zero out anything. But the very last thing is make sure you're like closing the doors and locking things. And then when you're leaving the session, talk to the client for a little bit. Like don't just like say, all right, bye, see you later. Usually having that little bit of a talk afterwards, it gives them a little bit of a reassurance that you know what you're doing. Unless either of you have some other place to be, I usually will spend another like 10, 20 minutes just chopping it up, just talking to them. Because then it allows me as an engineer to get to know them a little bit more and actually be able to give them what they want a little bit more. Because I can see like, oh, you really like Nirvana, for example. So that means you like how their mixes sound. And I'm not saying that to them like while I'm talking about it. We're just like talking and just chopping it up. But I often will kind of like pick their brain a little bit in terms of like, what do you like about this song? Or what do you like about this song? And that helps me inform my own mix decisions to give them a better product for what they want. So yeah, that's my list of tips and tricks.
That's great. That's like reading the crowd, man. It's a very awesome.
Yeah, reading the crowd.
Very awesome.
Exactly.
Tip. Those are some awesome techniques, tips, tricks. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. We covered everything during this podcast, from the preparation, how to make a session, to setting up every possible session, to closing out all the sessions. Now, if you like what you heard during this podcast and you want to know more, sign up today for a production class at Garnish Music Production and receive 5% off any course with code HIGH. That's HIGH. Again, you can check out garnishmusicproduction.com for that.
All right.
All right.
And that's it for today's podcast.
Get excited for our next episode. It's going to be awesome. We will see you then, guys.
We'll see you guys then. Peace.